The moon hung in the sky like a silver coin, casting a soft, eerie glow over the dense woods that surrounded her. It was the kind of night where the wind whispered through the trees, the shadows seemed to stretch and breathe, and everything felt just a little bit off. Have you ever had that feeling? The one where you wake up in the middle of the night, and something feels wrong? As if the world is just a bit too quiet, or too still. For Emily, that feeling wasn't just in her head. No, for her, it was real. Very real. Because on this night, under the cover of darkness, Emily did something she couldn't explain. She left the safety of her home, sleepwalking without knowing why, her feet guiding her toward an old abandoned cabin deep in the woods, a place she hadn't thought about in years. As she moved through the night, she couldn't shake the nagging sense that this wasn't a random walk. There was something waiting for her out there. Something calling her. And that something was her childhood toy. But it wasn't just any toy, it was a doll that she had lost years ago. A doll that seemed to hold the key to memories Emily had long since buried. The question is, why did she feel compelled to return to that place? Why, after all these years, did the past come rushing back to find her? Now, I know what you're probably thinking. What's so strange about a girl sleepwalking to an old cabin? But trust me, what Emily uncovered there was far beyond a simple case of sleepwalking. This was something that reached deep into her subconscious. Something that forced her to confront the past, unraveling dark secrets she never thought she'd have to face again. By the end of this video, you will know the truth of what happened that night and why it still haunts her to this day. But before we dive in, let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like there are pieces of your past unresolved, hidden, that just won't let you go? Have you ever felt like something from your childhood, something you thought was long forgotten, suddenly comes crashing back into your life? It's like one small thing, one tiny trigger, sets everything off. For Emily, that trigger was the doll, but what she uncovered at that abandoned cabin was so much more than anyone could have expected. You see, the mind is a powerful thing. It can protect you from the truth, or it can lead you straight into it. And in Emily's case, it did both. You might wonder, why would a person sleepwalk to an abandoned cabin? It doesn't make sense, right? Well, the truth often doesn't follow the rules. Emily wasn't just wandering through the woods that night, she was drawn there. Her body acted on its own, but her mind was holding on to something. Something long buried. And that toy, the one that was waiting for her, wasn't just a nostalgic relic from her childhood. No, this toy was the key to unlocking a twisted mystery, one that involved not just Emily's past, but the dark secrets of the very woods themselves. So, as you watch this video, stay with me. Stick around till the very end, because you're going to want to know what happened to Emily, what that toy really meant, and why she was sleepwalking in the first place. There's a lot more to this story than meets the eye. You won't be able to look at abandoned places the same way again after you hear the whole truth. Now, before we go any further, let me paint the picture for you. Imagine this, a dark forest, the kind you'd find deep in the outskirts of town, away from the noise of everyday life. The trees tower over you, their branches like twisted fingers reaching toward the sky. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth, and the only sound is the soft rustling of leaves. And then, in the distance, a shadow. A silhouette of an old cabin, its windows broken and its door hanging off its hinges. It looks abandoned, like it hasn't seen a living soul in years. But that's the thing. It's not as abandoned as it seems. You see, Emily wasn't just heading to any random cabin. This was the place where she spent the happiest and the most terrifying days of her childhood. A place that, until that night, she thought she'd forgotten. But something in the back of her mind knew. Something knew the truth about what had happened there. And when Emily stumbled upon that toy, the same one she'd lost all those years ago, it was like a switch flipped. You're probably wondering, what's the big deal about a toy, right? It's just a doll, after all. But let me tell you, this wasn't just any doll. It was a childhood possession, something that had been at the center of Emily's world back when she was young. A toy that she thought she'd lost forever, a toy that seemed to vanish one day without explanation. Little did she know, it wasn't gone at all. It had been waiting for her, hidden in that cabin, for all those years. But here's the twist. Emily's connection to this doll ran deeper than she could ever understand. It wasn't just a simple toy, it was a key to her past. A past that was buried so deep in her mind, she didn't even realize it was still there. You see, sometimes the mind does strange things to protect us from the pain of the past. And Emily had been running from something, a memory, a feeling that had been trapped in her subconscious for years. And that toy was the catalyst that forced her to face it. Now, as we venture further into this story, I want you to imagine yourself in Emily's shoes. Picture waking up in the middle of the night, unable to control your body as it moves on its own. Picture stepping outside, the cool night air brushing against your skin, and walking toward something you don't even understand. Your heart races, your mind is clouded with confusion, but you can't stop. You're compelled to go forward, toward that place from your past. A place you thought was gone. A place that holds secrets you never wanted to know. What would you do? Would you fight it? Or would you let it pull you in? As Emily stepped closer to the cabin, her pulse quickened. She didn't know why she was here. But something deep inside her told her this was where she was supposed to be. When she reached the door of the cabin, her heart nearly stopped. Inside, on the dusty wooden floor, was the very toy she thought she had lost. The doll. But as she picked it up, she realized that something was off. This wasn't the doll she remembered, it was different. Older. Worn. And it seemed to carry with it a dark energy, a presence that filled the room. That's when the pieces started to fall into place. And what Emily uncovered there, in that abandoned cabin, would change everything she thought she knew about her childhood, about herself, and about the terrifying events that followed. But what exactly did she find? And how does it connect to the strange dreams she'd been having? Stay tuned, because we're only getting started. This is a mystery you won't want to miss. So, I ask you again, do you really want to know the truth about what happened in that cabin? Because by the end of this video, you'll be faced with questions you may never have expected. Keep watching, and let's uncover the secrets together. Over the past few weeks leading up to that strange night, Emily's life had been unraveling in quiet, subtle ways that no one around her seemed to notice, not even herself. On the surface, things looked fine. She had just started her first year at a small liberal arts college in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of place with ivy-covered buildings, endless rain, and long, misty walks through tree-lined paths. Her roommate, Ava, was the friendly, oversharing type who filled the silence with music and stories, and Emily had managed to keep her own world contained, guarded, always smiling just enough to avoid questions. But beneath the routine of lectures, late-night coffee runs, and awkward class discussions, something was shifting inside her. She couldn't sleep. Not really. Even when her eyes were closed, her mind refused to rest. She started waking up with deep scratches on her arms, bruises on her knees, mud on her feet. At first, she thought she was just restless, maybe having vivid dreams, but there was a growing sense that her body was doing things without her knowledge, moving, walking, even leaving her dorm while she remained unaware. It didn't make sense, and every time she tried to explain it, even to herself, it sounded crazy. So she said nothing. She just kept trying to push through, hoping it would stop. The strangest part was the dreams. Every night, she found herself standing in the woods, always in the same place, surrounded by trees that whispered her name in voices that didn't sound quite human. There was a cabin in those dreams, always the same one, and in front of it, a child's toy lay half buried in the moss. Sometimes it was a doll, sometimes a stuffed bear, sometimes just a box with something rattling inside. But it always had the same feeling attached to it, dread. A quiet, creeping dread that crawled under her skin and stayed there long after she woke up. She tried to shake it off. She told herself it was just stress, that maybe the transition to college was taking more of a toll than she realized. But deep down, she knew something else was going on. Something that couldn't be explained by anxiety or exhaustion. She had stopped talking to her parents a few months before she left for college. It wasn't a fight. Exactly, more like a slow, emotional drifting that left a hollow space between them. Her mother had always been the nervous type, constantly hovering, constantly needing updates. Her father, on the other hand, was more like a ghost in the house, quiet, distant, always tinkering with something in the garage. There was one afternoon, just before she moved out, when she found her mother standing in her bedroom doorway holding a faded photograph. It was of Emily as a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, clutching a familiar-looking doll and sitting on the steps of a cabin. Her mother didn't say anything, just stood there for a moment before slipping the photo into her pocket and walking away. That moment stuck with her, but she never asked about it. Maybe because she was afraid of what the answer might be. What made everything more unsettling was the way Ava started acting once the sleepwalking began. At first, Ava laughed it off, joking that Emily must be doing midnight yoga in the woods. But as the nights went on, her tone shifted. She started waking Emily up, saying she'd heard her whispering in her sleep things that didn't sound like words. Sometimes, Ava swore she heard crying coming from Emily's side of the room when she wasn't even awake. One night, Ava pulled Emily aside and asked her if she remembered a name, Marin. Emily said no. The name meant nothing to her. But Ava insisted that she'd heard Emily say it over and over in her sleep, her voice rising like she was pleading with someone. That night, Emily barely slept at all. As the days passed, more little things started happening. Her textbooks were misplaced. Her phone would ring, but there'd be no one on the line. She'd find leaves in her laundry, dirt under her fingernails. The mirror in her dorm room fogged up on its own one morning, and when she wiped it clean, there was a handprint left behind, too small to be hers. At first, she thought she was just losing it. Maybe the stress had finally caught up to her. But then she remembered the photograph. And the dreams. And the doll. And suddenly, it didn't feel like a breakdown. It felt like something was pulling her back to a place she'd forgotten. A place that held answers. Or maybe more questions. There were people around her who started to notice the change, even if they didn't understand it. Her psychology professor, Dr. Sloan, had taken a strange interest in her. He was the kind of teacher who thrived on mystery, always talking about the subconscious mind, the mechanics of dreams, and the science behind trauma and repression. After one particularly sleepless night, Emily showed up to class pale and shaky, and Dr. Sloan stopped her on her way out. He looked at her for a long moment, then asked quietly, "Have you ever lost time?" It was such a simple question, but it hit her like a punch to the chest. She didn't answer. She just walked away. But from that moment on, she couldn't stop thinking about it. What if she had lost time? What if there were pieces of her life that she'd forgotten, or worse, that someone had made her forget? She began doing her own research, scouring online forums and Reddit threads filled with sleepwalking horror stories and tales of repressed memories. The words abandoned cabin, haunted toy, and lucid dreaming kept popping up in algorithm-recommended videos. One thread, in particular, mentioned a small town about an hour away from her campus, near the edge of a forest preserve. There had been stories about children disappearing there in the late 90s, kids who wandered off during the night and were later found wandering back days later, unable to speak, clutching old, rotted toys they swore they never owned. The town's name rang a bell, but she couldn't place it until she pulled out her birth certificate from a box under her bed. That's when she saw it. The town she was born in. The one her family had never talked about. The one she had apparently left when she was only 6 years old. The same age she was in that photograph. Things began falling into place, but nothing felt solid. Nothing felt certain. It was as if the deeper she dug, the more questions she uncovered. Why had her family left so suddenly? Why had they never gone back? Why did her mother hide that photograph? And most importantly, who was Marin? The more she searched, the more the lines between reality and memory began to blur. She found herself staring at the doll from her dream every time she closed her eyes. Its glassy, lifeless eyes seemed to follow her in the darkness. She couldn't eat. She barely spoke. Ava tried to help, but even she began pulling away, as if something about Emily frightened her. And maybe it should have. Emily's breaking point came on the night she found herself standing in the woods again, but this time, she wasn't asleep. It was like her body moved on its own, pulling her through the underbrush, her feet navigating as if they remembered the path without her help. And just like in her dreams, there it was, the cabin. Real. Silent. Waiting. Inside, dust hung in the air like fog, the scent of old wood and something faintly sweet like candy gone stale lingering in the corners. And on the floor, exactly where it had been in her dream, was the doll. Only now, as she stood over it, she noticed something she hadn't before. Sewn into its chest, almost hidden beneath the lace of its dress, were two small initials, MW. Her breath caught. Her heart pounded. Marin. But who was Marin? Was she just a name from a dream, or someone who had been real? Before she could move, before she could even pick the doll up again, there was a sound, a soft creak upstairs. Slow, steady footsteps above her. Emily froze. She wasn't alone. And that's where everything began to spiral out of control. Emily didn't dare move at first. Her breath caught in her throat, her body rigid with fear as the soft, deliberate footsteps above her sent a wave of cold through her spine. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The silence that followed felt louder than the creak itself. Whoever, or whatever, was upstairs had stopped moving, and now the stillness in the cabin was so complete it felt unnatural, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Emily forced herself to inch backward toward the doorway, never taking her eyes off the staircase. But just as her foot crossed the threshold, she heard something fall to the floor above. A soft, hollow thud like a small box or maybe a book. Curiosity wrestled with fear inside her, and for a brief moment, fear lost. She climbed the stairs slowly, each creaking step feeling like a scream in the quiet cabin. The second floor was coated in thick dust and cobwebs, but there was something odd about one of the rooms. Its door was slightly ajar, and the floor just beyond it had footprints in the dust. Small ones. Like a child's. Emily reached for the doorknob, hand shaking, but when she pushed it open, the room was empty, no person, no movement, just a small wooden box lying in the center of the floor. She picked it up carefully, heart thudding in her ears, and as she opened the lid, she saw something that made her stomach twist. Inside was a set of old photographs, most of them faded and curling at the edges. They showed children, smiling, holding toys, playing in the woods. And in one of them, unmistakably, was Emily. But the strangest part wasn't her presence in the photo, it was the other child standing next to her. A girl with dark hair and a blank expression. On the back of the photo, someone had scribbled in thick black ink, Marin, Summer, 2008. Before Emily could process what she was seeing, a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind her. She screamed and dropped the box, scattering the photos across the dusty floor. Scrambling to her feet, she threw the door open, heart racing, and tore down the stairs without looking back. When she reached the outside, the air felt thick and electric, like a storm was coming, even though the sky was perfectly clear. She didn't stop running until she was back at the edge of the forest, her chest burning, her mind racing with questions. Who was that girl? Why couldn't she remember her? And why had her family never told her about any of this? The next day, she returned to her dorm with every intention of showing Ava the photos, but when she opened her backpack, the wooden box was gone. Not just misplaced, gone. As if it had never been there. She tore through her things, upended her drawers, checked every corner of the room, but it had vanished. She tried telling Ava about the cabin, the doll, the photos, but Ava's reaction was not what she expected. Instead of concern or belief, Ava went quiet, too quiet, and then she said something that chilled Emily to the bone. "You shouldn't go back there," she whispered. "It's better if you let it go." When Emily asked her what she meant, Ava just shook her head and muttered, "Some things are hidden for a reason." That night, Emily searched Ava's side of the room while she was out. She didn't feel good about it, but something about Ava's reaction had set off every alarm in her mind. Tucked inside the bottom drawer of Ava's desk, beneath a pile of old notebooks, she found a crumpled printout of the same photo she'd seen in the box at the cabin, the one of her and Marin. The same one. Only this version had something different, a red circle drawn around the doll in Emily's hands. Written underneath in shaky handwriting was a single phrase, "She remembers more than she admits." Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the paper. Why did Ava have this? How long had she been keeping it? And why hadn't she said anything before? Suddenly, nothing felt safe anymore. She didn't know who to trust. She considered going to the school counselor or even the police, but she couldn't imagine how she'd explain any of this without sounding completely unhinged. And even if she did, how would they help? What proof did she have? The box was gone. The photos were gone. And Ava, now acting like a completely different person, had started avoiding her. But the worst part came 2 days later, when Emily tried to contact her parents. She called and left 3 voicemails. No answer. Then she sent a text. Did we ever live near a cabin in the woods? Who is Marin? The response came 12 minutes later. Not a call. Just a text. Stop asking questions. It's not safe. Emily stared at the screen in disbelief. Her mother had never texted like that, cold, sharp, almost angry. It didn't sound like her. And that's when the possibility hit her. What if it wasn't her? What if someone else had sent that message? Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Do not go back to the cabin. That's when she knew whoever was trying to keep her away from the truth, they were watching her. And worse, they were close. She couldn't sleep that night. She kept hearing footsteps outside her dorm. Once, she thought she saw a figure standing under the streetlight across the lawn, but when she blinked, it was gone. The tension was tightening around her like a noose, and for the first time, Emily felt like she wasn't just being haunted by her past, she was being hunted. But by who? And why? The deeper she dug, the more it seemed like everyone around her was hiding something. Ava. Her parents. Maybe even Dr. Sloan, who'd asked another odd question in class that day. Do you believe children can forget trauma until the body remembers it for them? He looked right at Emily as he said it. Almost like he knew. The next morning, Emily returned to the cabin, needing answers more than ever. But this time, it wasn't empty. The front door was slightly open, and inside, the furniture had been rearranged. On the wall, scratched into the wood in uneven lines, were 5 words, "You were here with her." Emily's knees buckled. She leaned against the wall for balance, staring at the message. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked around the cabin, panicked, heart pounding, and then her eyes landed on something new, something that hadn't been there before. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a small, worn journal. She opened it with trembling fingers. The first page had only 1 line written in the center, underlined twice. I was never supposed to leave. And just beneath that line, a child's fingerprint in dried blood. Emily stood frozen in the middle of that crumbling cabin, the journal trembling in her hands, the child's fingerprint a chilling confirmation that this wasn't just a dream or some psychological breakdown. The air felt heavy, like the entire house was pressing inward, holding its breath, waiting for her next move. But before she could turn the page, before she could find out who had written those words or why they were never supposed to leave, her phone vibrated violently in her jacket pocket, jolting her back to reality. She hesitated, staring at the device like it might burn her fingers, then slowly pulled it out. It was a message, one that wasn't meant for her. A screenshot from an unknown number. By the time she reached Zoe's dorm, the building was strangely silent. She banged on the door several times before it creaked open slowly, revealing the room exactly as it had looked in the photo. But Zoe was gone. Her sketchbook lay open on the bed, its pages filled with frantic drawings, trees, dolls, shadowy figures, and in the center of it all, the cabin. Scrawled along the margins in different colors of ink were phrases that made Emily's stomach twist. She remembers too much. Don't let her go back. We are the ones who stayed. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. And yet, somehow, it all felt familiar, like something buried deep in her bones was beginning to resurface. Before she could leave, her phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. One more and it all unravels. And just beneath it, a photo of Dr. Sloan standing in the woods, looking directly at the camera with a cold, unreadable expression. Emily's blood ran cold. Was he part of this? Was he watching her, or was someone watching him? The man had always seemed intense, maybe even a little too invested in certain topics, but now she wondered if he'd been guiding her toward this from the start. Had he known about the cabin? About Marin? About the things Emily wasn't supposed to remember? She went to his office later that afternoon, pretending she was there for extra credit. He smiled like nothing was wrong, offered her tea, asked how she was sleeping almost too casually. She watched his every move, looking for signs, any twitch or glance that might give him away, but he remained composed. When she asked if he knew anything about sleepwalking linked to traumatic childhood events, his answer was calm but unsettling. The body never forgets, he said, tapping his temple lightly. Even when the mind does. Sometimes, it just needs a reason to bring it all back. Then he paused. But memory is a dangerous thing. It's not always accurate. And not everyone wants the truth to resurface. That last part lingered in the air like smoke. Emily left without saying another word. That night, unable to sleep, she pored over Zoe's sketchbook. Near the back, she found a page where the drawings changed drastically, less abstract, more detailed. One image showed a girl in a white dress standing at the edge of a pond, holding a doll that looked eerily like the one from the cabin. Behind her, in the trees, shadowy figures watched. Underneath it was written, "Only the drowned forget." Emily didn't know what it meant, but it added another layer to the nightmare. She remembered the stories from the Reddit threads, the ones about children who returned from the woods mute, holding toys that didn't belong to them. Had Zoe been one of them? Had Emily? The next morning, everything escalated. Zoe was reported missing. The police were on campus, and her roommate claimed she hadn't seen her in 2 days. Emily didn't say a word. She couldn't. How could she explain the doll, the messages, the cabin, without being labeled as paranoid or worse? But the guilt gnawed at her, and so did the fear. If Zoe had been taken, if she had been pulled back into whatever nightmare Emily was only beginning to uncover, then how long until it happened to her too? Later that day, another package arrived for Emily. No name, no return address. Inside was a burned fragment of a newspaper article from 2008. The edges were blackened and brittle, but the headline was still legible. 2 girls vanish from summer camp, one found days later, unable to speak. Emily's eyes scanned the rest of the piece frantically, trying to make sense of what little remained. The girl who had been found was named Marin. Only now, with the article in her hand, with her own memories swirling like smoke in her head, Emily realized the most horrifying possibility yet. What if Marin wasn't someone she had forgotten? What if Marin had never left? And what if Emily was the one who did? The change was immediate, almost brutal, like someone had flipped a switch in Emily's world and drained all the safety from it. She wasn't just anxious now, she was afraid in a way that was primal, physical, the kind of fear that hums under your skin and makes every sound, every shadow, feel like a threat. After receiving the burned newspaper clipping, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, eyes wide open, listening to the creaks of the old dorm building and the occasional far-off laughter from other students who were still blissfully unaware of how quickly reality could slip. But Emily knew. She knew now that she was being watched, followed, played. She could feel it like a weight pressing against the back of her neck wherever she went, and the worst part was that no one believed her. No one even noticed. The morning after Zoe was officially declared missing, Emily found something else, something far worse than any cryptic drawing or message. As she left the dorm to walk to class, her breath caught in her chest when she saw it. Pinned to the windshield of her car was a photograph. It was grainy and black and white, clearly taken at night, and it showed Emily standing in front of the cabin, but she didn't remember anyone being there when she was. In the photo, she was holding the doll again, but this time, her eyes were blacked out with marker. Across the bottom, in red ink, were 3 chilling words: "You were warned." She looked around the parking lot, her eyes darting from one empty vehicle to the next, but there was no one. Just silence. She felt her stomach twist. This wasn't just a warning, it was a message. Someone knew everything. Someone was watching her every move and getting closer. She crumpled the photo into her pocket and got in the car, heart racing so hard she could hear it in her ears, unsure of where she was driving until she realized her hands had taken her back to the forest. To the edge of those woods that seemed to pulse with something unseen, something waiting. But she didn't go in. She couldn't, not yet. Back in her dorm, she tried to call her parents again. No answer. This time, she left a voicemail. Her voice shook as she begged her mother to call her back, begged her to explain what they had kept from her all these years, what had happened in that town, and why Marin's name was now tangled in everything like a vine strangling the truth. But the reply didn't come as a call. An hour later, an envelope was slid under her door. No knock, no footsteps in the hallway. Just the envelope. Inside was a single page torn from a book, her childhood journal. She recognized her own handwriting immediately. The page was dated July 14, 2008. The last summer before her family left that town for good. The entry was short, barely a paragraph, but it ended with a sentence that made her blood run cold. Marin says if I tell anyone, she'll make them forget me too. Emily dropped the paper and backed away like it might burn her. That sentence, those words, felt like a memory she didn't know she had. Suddenly, flashes of that summer came roaring back, not in clear detail but in feelings. Fear. Hiding. Whispering under covers. A game that wasn't really a game. And the growing realization that Marin hadn't just been a friend or an imaginary figure. Marin had been something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something real. Later that day, as Emily sat in the campus library trying to distract herself, she noticed someone watching her from the far side of the room. He looked like a student, maybe a few years older, dressed in a worn hoodie with the hood pulled low. She caught his gaze once, and his eyes didn't move. Just stayed locked on her. Minutes passed, and he was still there, still watching. When she finally stood and walked toward him, determined to confront him, he disappeared behind a row of shelves. She ran after him, her boots echoing against the polished floor, but when she turned the corner, he was gone. Completely vanished. No sound. No trace. Nothing but a single slip of paper left on the floor where he'd stood. On it was a rough charcoal sketch of the cabin and, beneath it, a sentence scrawled in jagged handwriting. You left her there. You broke the promise. Emily stared at the paper, feeling dizzy, like the ground beneath her was tilting. She didn't remember any promise. She didn't remember leaving anyone. But the clues were adding up, twisting her sense of self in ways she couldn't explain. What if she had broken a promise? What if that summer wasn't just forgotten, it had been erased? She wondered now whether the things in her dreams, being pulled into the woods, the whispering trees, the feeling of drowning in air weren't dreams at all, but fractured memories trying to break through. And if that was true, then how much of her life had been a lie? Everything felt unsafe now. The campus, her dorm, her own mind. Ava was still nowhere to be found. Her roommate's belongings were slowly vanishing piece by piece, like someone was erasing her existence. When Emily asked around, the answers got weirder. Some students claimed Ava had transferred weeks ago. Others said they'd never heard of her. Even the RA looked confused when Emily asked what room Ava was registered in. There's no Ava on this floor, he said with a shrug. But Emily remembered her clearly, her voice, her laugh, her scent. She remembered conversations, shared meals, arguments. It didn't make sense. Unless Ava had never been enrolled at all. Unless she had been placed there, in Emily's orbit, for a reason. A reason that was now gone. Emily started seeing things that weren't there, or maybe they were there and only now visible. Faces in mirrors that didn't match hers. Shadows on her ceiling that moved even when she was still. The doll appeared again, once on her desk, once in her backpack, and once, worst of all, on her pillow when she returned from the library. She had thrown it out each time, and each time it returned, looking more worn, more twisted, like it was aging with her fear. The final time she touched it, she felt something hard beneath the stitching. She ripped it open, fingers shaking, and inside she found a tooth. A real human tooth, yellowed and cracked. She dropped it in horror, backing into the wall, her eyes watering. This wasn't some haunted object story she could laugh off later. This was personal. Intentional. A message. The only person left who might hold answers was Dr. Sloan, but when she returned to his office, it had been cleaned out. No books, no papers, no trace of him. The department secretary said he'd taken a sudden sabbatical. No one knew where he'd gone. Or at least, no one was saying. Emily now knew 3 things for certain. 1. Something terrible had happened to her as a child, something she had been forced to forget. 2. Marin wasn't just a name from her dreams, she was real, and she was angry. And 3. Someone was making sure Emily never remembered the whole truth. But then, on the night when she thought it couldn't get any worse, when she was preparing to leave campus for good and run as far from the woods as she could, she found something in her mailbox that changed everything. A videotape. No return address. Just a piece of masking tape across the front that read "Watch Alone." She took it back to her room, hands shaking, heart thudding with dread, and slid it into the old VCR Ava had once used for thrift movies. The screen buzzed. Static. Then a flicker. And what she saw made her fall to her knees. It was her. At age 6. Standing in front of the cabin. Crying. And behind her, holding her hand, was Marin. Emily sat motionless on the floor, the blue glow of the old television flickering across her face as the tape continued to play. Her 6-year-old self sobbed in the video, clutching the doll to her chest, her face blotchy and pale, eyes darting nervously toward the camera. Marin stood beside her, hand wrapped tightly around hers, but there was something off about the way she moved, too still, too composed for a child. She never looked at Emily, never spoke. Her eyes stayed locked on the lens, as if she knew someone watching years later, would see her. But it wasn't just that eerie stare or the grainy quality of the tape that made Emily's stomach knot. It was what happened next. The screen flickered again, and when the image returned, it showed someone stepping into the frame. An adult. A man. He knelt beside the two girls and whispered something to Emily that was too low to make out. Then he looked up, just enough for the light to catch his face, and it was unmistakable. It was Dr. Sloan. Emily recoiled in shock, scrambling away from the screen like it might lunge at her. Her thoughts spiraled, unable to connect this image with the quiet, eccentric professor she thought she knew. He wasn't supposed to be part of her past, he wasn't supposed to be there at all. He had claimed to be interested in her dreams, in trauma, in psychological healing. But he had lied. He had known her. Known Marin. And not as a researcher or teacher. As someone involved. Someone there. The questions exploded in her mind. Had he been studying her this entire time, waiting for the memories to return? Was his interest in her a coincidence, or part of something darker? She rewound the tape, watched it again, this time focusing on every detail, the way Emily flinched when Dr. Sloan touched her shoulder, the way Marin's face twitched when he whispered. There was a familiarity in the scene that made Emily's skin crawl, as if this wasn't the first time it had happened. She wondered how many tapes existed. How many memories had been recorded without her knowledge. And then, for the first time, she wondered if Marin had ever existed at all, not in the way she thought. The breakthrough came not long after. She had returned to Zoe's abandoned dorm, hoping maybe there was something she missed, some clue she had overlooked. She went through the sketchbook again, flipping it back and forth, until she noticed something odd, the way the pages had been numbered. One page was missing. Torn out cleanly. But when she held the book to the light, she saw faint impressions from the pen that had written on the page before it was ripped. She rubbed a pencil gently across the surface and revealed part of a sentence. Marin is not a name, it's an acronym. The rest was illegible, but that fragment was enough to crack everything wide open. Emily spent the next 2 days digging into every public record, academic journal, and off-the-grid conspiracy thread she could find, piecing together the clues that had been hiding in plain sight. And finally, she found it, an obscure paper published in the early 2000s under a government-sponsored child psychology study. It had been pulled from most databases, but fragments remained, especially on dark forums and deep dives into controversial experiments. One of the experimental programs was called MAREN, Memory Alteration and Repression through Environmental Neuromodulation. The idea was horrifying. The study claimed to have tested a method of planting and removing memories in children using. But someone had been there before her. The cabin had been burned to the ground. Ash and twisted metal were all that remained. No doll. No journal. No evidence. They were covering their tracks. Erasing it all. And sitting on top of the ashes, perfectly clean, was her childhood bracelet, the one with the blue beads her mother had made for her, and a note tucked inside it. She never left. You just stopped looking. Emily picked it up, staring at the smudged ink, the dirt-stained paper, the undeniable message. They weren't just erasing her past. They were rewriting it. And now, they were coming for her present. Emily didn't remember getting out of the car. She barely remembered following the narrow trail behind the ruins of the cabin, past the charred wood and melted plastic, through the trees that seemed to lean in closer with every step. But something pulled her deeper into the forest, something primal and unresolved, like gravity but meaner, sharper. Her breath was tight in her chest, her ears filled with the distant echo of laughter that didn't sound quite human. She had reached a place inside herself where fear didn't paralyze her anymore. It sharpened her. She knew what they had done now, what Division Theta had tried to erase. What they thought they had buried. But they didn't count on memory bleeding through the cracks. They didn't expect her to keep digging once the world she knew had been stripped away. The trees finally gave way to a clearing she had seen only in fragments before, in dreams and flashbacks and pieces of drawings never finished. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded an underground hatch half buried in moss and dead leaves, the kind of structure you'd never find unless you already knew it was there. And clearly, someone had known. A section of the fence was cut clean through, the hatch unlocked, slightly open. She hesitated only for a second before pulling it open the rest of the way and stepping into the dark. The air was damp and still. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, leading down a concrete corridor that smelled of mildew and old fear. The walls were lined with half-faded posters, ones meant for children, showing cartoons pointing to charts labeled "Safety is Trust" and "Telling is Forgetting." Emily felt sick just reading them. This place wasn't abandoned. It had been hidden. She passed through metal doors and storage rooms until she found the main chamber. Rows of filing cabinets. 2 flickering computer monitors still powered. On the far wall, a whiteboard with names, dozens of them each paired with a timestamp and a note beside it. She saw her own name, twice. One entry dated 2008, marked, Integration, Partial. Marin Construct Successful. And another, more recent, labeled, Risk of Breach, Terminate Asset. She stared at it, pulse pounding, unable to look away. Terminate. They had planned to erase her again. Maybe not just her memories this time. Maybe all of her. But before the full weight of that word could settle, she heard a voice behind her. Calm, measured, familiar. You weren't supposed to come back here. She turned slowly, and there he was, Dr. Sloane, dressed not like a professor now but like someone who had dropped the act entirely. He wasn't surprised to see her. In fact, he looked relieved, almost proud. We spent years protecting you from this, he said, stepping into the light, his face older than she remembered. You were stable. You were one of our few successes. But curiosity always ruins things. Emily shook her head, backing away toward the console. You lied to me. My entire life, you let me believe I was broken. Sick. And the truth was, you made me this way. I guided you, he replied coldly. We created Marin to hold the trauma so you didn't have to. She carried the memory. And we were close, so close to finally proving the mind could be rewritten without consequence. You're the proof it worked. Until you started asking the wrong questions. She laughed bitterly, blinking tears from her eyes. So all those kids on that board, Zoe, Ava, what were they? Experiments. Casualties. Ava was real enough, he said with a shrug. She was an embedded monitor. We sent her to keep an eye on you. But even she started slipping, remembering things she shouldn't. We had to extract her. Emily's stomach twisted. You killed her. She's not dead, he said, flatly. Not exactly. She just doesn't remember you anymore. Which is safer for both of you. Emily couldn't breathe. She scanned the room for something, anything that could prove what had happened here. Something to bring out. Something to destroy it all. Then she saw it, a hard drive hooked up to one of the terminals, its light blinking steady. She lunged for it just as Sloane grabbed her arm. They struggled, slammed into one of the metal cabinets, papers and folders spilling out around them. He wasn't stronger than her, he wasn't used to fighting, but he was desperate, and desperation gave him an edge. He shoved her against the wall and raised a syringe from his coat pocket. We'll try again. Start fresh. You'll wake up with no questions. You'll be happy. You don't have to feel this pain. She stared him dead in the eyes, her voice shaking with rage. I want to remember. Before he could react, she swung the heavy metal keyboard across his face. He stumbled, dropping the syringe, and she kicked it away, grabbed the drive, and bolted from the room. Alarms screamed as she ran through the corridors, red lights flashing above her. She didn't look back. She didn't care who was coming. She made it out of the hatch moments before the ground behind her shook with the sound of an explosion. Someone else had triggered the failsafe, maybe remote, maybe on site. The entire underground lab began to collapse in on itself. Division Theta wasn't just covering their tracks, they were burning the whole operation to the ground. Later, when she was safe, when the adrenaline had worn off and her hands had stopped shaking, she plugged the drive into a secure system. Video files, documents, test logs, names, photos of children. All of it. Evidence. Proof of the experiment. Of what they did to her. What they did to dozens, maybe hundreds of others. She had what she needed to expose them. But just as she opened the first video, one labeled Subject 23, Marin Construction, the footage began with something she didn't expect. Her mother. Sitting across from a young Dr. Sloan, nodding solemnly. Signing a consent form. Emily stared at the screen, numb. Her mother hadn't been fooled. She hadn't been manipulated. She knew. She had agreed to it. To everything. The betrayal hit harder than any blow. She realized then that the people you trust don't always lie to hurt you. Sometimes they lie to protect themselves. And sometimes, that lie becomes who you are. And then the last file opened on its own. An audio file, playing in her headphones. A voice young, distorted, familiar. Hello, Emily. You're getting close again. Do you remember what happened last time? The weeks that followed felt surreal, like walking through a version of reality built on shattered glass and quiet echoes of everything Emily had once believed. She stayed under the radar, moving from one small motel to another, the hard drive hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of an old novel she used to love as a kid. Her face was never on the news, and no one officially acknowledged that the lab had existed, but she knew she was being watched, less aggressively now, more like they were waiting. Waiting to see what she would do. Maybe they assumed she would break. Most people did. After all, that was the core of Division Theta's belief system, that the mind could only carry so much truth before it turned on itself. But Emily didn't break. Not this time. She eventually got in touch with someone, a journalist whose work she remembered from a viral exposé on covert psychology experiments conducted in the 90s. His name was Marcus Reyes, and at first, he didn't believe her. Then she sent him one file, just one. A video of the session between Dr. Sloan and a 6-year-old girl who couldn't stop shaking, while a fabricated imaginary friend stood smiling in the corner of the room. She didn't even need to include a caption. Within hours, Marcus booked a flight to meet her. It wasn't the kind of story that would hit trending news immediately. This wasn't a TikTok scandal or a celebrity exposé. But it was real. It was dangerous. And it needed to be told. They worked together in secret, using burner laptops and private servers to compile everything into a report so airtight it couldn't be dismissed as conspiracy. No embellishments, no emotion, just facts, documents, names, footage, time-stamped proof that an unregulated government-backed group had spent decades using children as lab rats to test the manipulation of memory. And that one of those children had lived to tell the story. Emily never put her face to the report. She didn't want the fame. She didn't want to be a face at all. She just wanted the truth to live outside her body, for it to belong to the world now instead of weighing her down like a secret no one would ever believe. She watched as the story gained quiet traction, initial skepticism giving way to outrage, then calls for investigation, and eventually leaked whistleblower documents that proved the network had ties to both government and private defense contractors. Public hearings followed, but Division Theta had gone underground, files wiped, operatives scattered. What the public knew was only a fraction of what Emily had uncovered, but it was enough to force cracks in the foundation. She kept moving, never staying in one place too long, but something in her changed. Not closure, not peace, those words felt too easy, too final, but there was clarity now. She wasn't sleepwalking anymore, not through forests, not through her life. Her past didn't feel like a locked door behind her anymore. It was something she had walked through and survived. And every time she thought she might be slipping back into the numbness, she would replay the voice from the final audio file. That distorted whisper from Marin, "You're getting close again." It still haunted her, not because she feared Marin, but because she finally understood her. Marin wasn't a monster or a ghost or some hallucinated friend born out of trauma. She had been a shield. A wall. A living compartment inside Emily's mind, designed to carry unbearable memories so a little girl could pretend to be normal. But Marin had also been real in her own way. Real enough to talk to, real enough to miss, and maybe even real enough to have stayed with Emily all these years, not just out of design, but out of some fragment of love twisted into survival. Emily realized that Marin wasn't gone. She never could be. She had been created to hold pain, and now that the truth had been let out into the light, Marin had nothing left to carry. Just silence. One cold morning, Emily stood at the edge of the forest one last time. The ground where the cabin had once stood was overgrown now, as if the woods themselves were trying to forget. She dropped the doll there, the stitched, hollow-eyed thing that had returned to her over and over again, and she didn't feel fear or grief. She felt gratitude. For every moment she had fought to wake up. For every memory she had reclaimed. For every lie she had burned down to make space for truth. She turned to leave, and for a moment, in the tree line, she thought she saw a figure, small, barefoot, with wild hair and a crooked smile. But when she blinked, it was just the trees again. Still, she smiled back. Not out of fear, not out of superstition, but because some parts of us never leave. They watch. They protect. They remember when we can't. As she walked away for the last time, the camera she had mounted on a nearby stump, a precaution, a habit now, recorded something she didn't see. The doll.